Innovative Instruction Technology Grant, Teaching with AI, a cross-campus community of practice. Our leadership team, which has educators joining me from SUNY Alfred, Morrisville, Orange, Oswego, and Schenectady, is so grateful to SUNY IITG for funding this project, which is offering resources, support, and community to faculty cohorts of about 10 members at each of our 6 campuses. Some of us have a few additional members thanks to on-campus funding. So essentially, our faculty members, most of whom are here with us today, will be developing new course activities, engaging students in using generative AI technologies. And Anna's talk today is meant to kick things off for this program, giving us a shared language and set of ideas for cross-campus conversation. So I want to welcome all of you who are part of that program, but of course I also want to welcome the many others from across SUNY and beyond who are here with us today. We worked with the Center for Professional Development at SUNY and with Lynn-Ann to make this talk more widely available, and I'm very grateful to Lynn-Ann, Michaela, and others for their help. So just to say a word about Anna before I turn it over to her, I knew that Anna Mills would be the right person to help us kick off this program because her awesome work in the emergent field of AI pedagogy aligns with our values. We're hoping to guide faculty to design critical, inclusive, and active AI learning activities for students. I'm going to let Anna tell you more about her critical approach as she gets started. But for those who haven't yet encountered her work, I encourage you to visit her website, where she shares many free resources and collects recent interviews and publications. Anna is a writing teacher. She's the author of an open access textbook, a curator of AI resources. She is a member of the Task Force on Writing and AI, which was convened jointly by the Modern Language Association and the Conference on College Composition and Communication. And she's a faculty member for AAC&U's Institute on AI, Pedagogy, and the Curriculum, in addition to just being an all-around important voice for critical AI literacy in higher ed. So she has a lot to share with us. I'm going to turn things over to her, and I'm just going to thank her for being here with us.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for having me. I'm really excited to share this time with you all. And I'm just going to kind of dive in, but I'll try to watch the Q&A. So I am primarily an English teacher in community colleges, and I'm going to be coming from that space and sharing with you first some sort of principles for what I'm looking for when I choose how and when to invite students to use AI. And then I will take us through sort of 4 different approaches to that. AI for examples of course concepts, AI for formative feedback on student work, for students to get feedback before they turn it in, AI for research assistance, and assigning AI chat sessions. And I'll put the slide link in the chat one more time, and you're welcome to share those slides as well beyond this. So these are the principles that I've kind of come to organically in my teaching and through, lots of dialogue in all the forums Rachel mentioned about AI and pedagogy. But before I say the principles, I just like to sort of frame AI and generative AI as systems that predict outcomes. So systems that are trained through intensive statistical analysis of patterns in very large amounts of data, often from the internet. And specifically, generative AI is any system like that that produces text, images, or videos, or audio, of course. And mostly we'll be talking about large language models, the type of AI used in chatbots, producing new text that in response to a user's request. Usually it's new, occasionally it's copied from some other source. But I think, I like to frame it because it's really important to how we integrate it pedagogically to think of these systems as predicting what would the humans likely say next. What would the humans say? What do the humans want to hear based on all the text or data that they've been given and trained on? Um, and helpful to remember there's a little randomness baked in, so they might give different results each time, but essentially they are calculating, they're doing these predictions, they're not thinking or experiencing or knowing or understanding the way that we are. um so given that, um number one, I think it's important to me, if we're inviting students to work with these systems, if we're trying to provide some guidance around how to think about them as they become more and more integrated into work processes and daily life, um, most important to me is to help students build kind of skepticism of what they're hearing from these systems. We don't want students to worship them. We don't want students to think that these are something they're not. And so practice identifying when they actually get something wrong, when they're inaccurate or biased, is really essential practice. Both if we want to be critical of the systems and if we want to celebrate them and use them. We can't work well with them unless we are questioning what they give us, um, pushing back, finding what's wrong with it, improving on it. And a second principle is that we don't want to abandon our existing learning goals. I'm looking for ways to incorporate AI and AI literacy that stimulate student thinking and writing to address those existing goals. So let's look for sweet spots where the AI literacy can converge with our existing um, learning outcomes. And as I said, I don't want to teach students to worship AI. I want to invite them to engage with it in ways that help them develop their own sense of agency and the value of their own voice, their own ideas, their own human judgment. Um, so those are kind of, one way that we could play around with summing those up is a phrase that I kind of came up with, that we want to use AI more for input than for output. I think there's a tendency to think about it as like a shortcut to producing, a finished product. But if we're talking about using it pedagogically, I think it's more helpful to think of it as um, input for students. That's the beginning of a process rather than as the output. Um, so I'm not going to go too much into depth on sort of how to give students context on what AI is, but I am going to encourage sharing some basic resources on it and maybe having discussions of it before we do invite them to use it in their learning process. And here I just have some really kind of accessible, brief resources that you can share with students. One is from our task force that Rachel mentioned. We have a two-page student guide to AI literacy. I have a very short slide deck that's an orientation to AI for students with some basic principles. And then a more extended orientation to AI for students that's an OER textbook that's in progress. It's a Google Doc. You and students can feel free to comment on it. And there are also some assignments I have up on Canvas Commons that are possible ways to introduce AI, including readings, videos, and a wonderful piece by Catherine Conrad that's a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights for education that I recommend to everyone. So I want to focus mostly on these kind of pedagogical approaches to inviting students to use it, to cultivate those principles that I mentioned. And the first one is pretty intuitive. You've probably heard this recommended. The idea of using AI to come up with examples of course concepts. So really simply, we figure out what does AI do in relation to some concept we want to teach? And how can we critique that? So either we come up with that example or we invite the students to come up with it, and then they're reflecting on the AI performance. So for example, give an example of the use of regression analysis on data related to anxiety and screen time. Um, and you see there that one of the great benefits of this is that we can tailor those examples to either course content or student interests or student background, identity, hobbies, whatever we think will be engaging. Or we can ask students, what do you want your example to be about of this course concept? So here are just a few examples, and you can see either and I'll give you a chance to experiment with that in a second. So I share some examples from the AI Pedagogy Project from the Meta Lab at Harvard, and they've curated educators' suggestions on ways to integrate AI. And this was an example of inviting students to evaluate a large language model's reasoning. So an example of how to solve a problem in your field. And the teacher who suggested this has also suggested asking the chatbot to generate multiple solutions and explain its reasoning. So we're giving not just one example, but multiple examples and the reasoning behind them. So there's a lot of rich material for students to sort of critique and question there. So let's try it really quickly. You can go to, I don't know if you've used Perplexity. That's a sort of chatbot search combination. And I'll put it in the chat, perplexity.ai. I use it for workshops because you don't have to create an account. And it's worth exploring as a platform because it will give you sources to sort of check and verify the information in addition to sort of the chat answer. So if you want to just try really simply tell it to give an example to illustrate and then put in some challenging concept that you teach and see how well does it do. And a neat feature in Perplexity that I didn't know about at first is this focus. When you're in it, you can choose from various options. So the default, it gives you some sources from the internet in addition to its chat answer. But you can also have it search academic papers for those sources, or you can just not have it. You can have it act like what we might think of as a regular chatbot in the ChatGPT model and just have it write without sources. You can also do YouTube or Reddit. So I'm curious, if you did try it, if you want to share in the chat, how well did it do with the example? Did the example really illustrate the concept accurately, clearly? Or did you see some bias or maybe some assumptions that it was making, misconceptions? And if so, I guess the question is, as these systems get more advanced, and we never know quite how quickly they are going to get more advanced, but we're definitely not done in terms of being at the end point of how sophisticated they can be. So, we can ask ourselves, would students be able to identify any problems in those examples? Would that be the right level of challenge for students? And we might also be curious how if the results that have sources that have links with them are more accurate than the ones without. Yeah, and sounds like it's doing well so far with 4 people's questions. So That's helpful to know. Maybe it wouldn't be a good way to teach skepticism, right? But it could be a good way to find a decent example. Did well with a parasitology question. Okay, great. Interesting. Okay, so some other things you can try, not necessarily that at this moment, but you can attach files to Perplexity. So if you want to give it specific course materials about the concept and how you frame it, you can attach a class handout or any other text that you want to give it so that it gives a more customized example to your approach. I also recommend, I have not paid for a Perplexity account, but I have made an account, a free account, and used they have a few, 5 free pro searches, and it's a little bit more sophisticated. Um, okay. And you can ask, it actually asks you clarifying questions sometimes, if it determines it needs more information to give you a good result. Um, oh, that's interesting. So someone is finding that it didn't give the top best examples of Islamic feminism that they would have identified, but it didn't do terribly. Interesting. So one person saying it couldn't provide evidence or concrete examples. That's interesting. I would say let's, push it further. Um, yeah, I think that's a great point that Adele is making in the chat, that they might need to know the subject very well in order to gain skepticism of problematic responses. So if this doesn't work to give them practice becoming skeptical, then other approaches may, right? Or we may need to curate that flawed AI output and explain to them why it's wrong, right? Um, and someone's asking, are the sources trustable or made up? So Perplexity does provide the links, so you can go to the website of that source, and it is up to us to evaluate them. They're not all trustworthy. I see a lot of Reddit and YouTube, and sometimes sort of corporate advertising sites, even at the top of Perplexity results. But they are websites, they're not AI generated sources. Um, so and that's funny. Somebody asked it about Derrida's différance and wasn't sure it got the joke. Um, okay. So ways to do this in class could include, there's always that excitement of doing it live with students and saying, hey, what do you want me to try? And doing something according to their theme or interest, and then critiquing it together. There's a certain energy to that. We can model our own AI prompting strategies and troubleshooting as we do that. But as you've seen, it might do so well that that doesn't give you a chance to show where it's flawed. So you might want to try generating and ahead of time and finding examples that could be critiqued, um, and letting students do that critique in groups or as homework. I've created some template phrases for critiquing AI outputs that kind of are just intended to give students a little more confidence, and just suggest, yes, you can say these things, you can speak back to it. So this is from my OER textbook, and the link is in the slides, but things like this sounds plausible because it fits in this way, but it doesn't really make sense because of X, that kind of thing. And as Alina is pointing out, people will get different answers that each time they prompt a platform, so students will get different answers. And that can make it feel more dynamic and more individualized. And can be interesting, but it could also be an issue if you want to standardize. So in that case, you might want to generate an example ahead of time and share it with them. You can share a Perplexity chat session as a link with students so they see what chat you had and they can comment on it. Another way to do this, as people are pointing out, is to invite students to prompt for examples on their own. and either critique those examples or ask them to keep modifying, keep speaking back to the chatbot until they get an example that they like. And I'll talk a little more about assigning chats later. How can you tell what sites or data each AI platform is trained on? That's a great question. A lot of people are advocating for more transparency into the data that these systems are trained on. Right now, the companies are not required to disclose, and they don't largely. The biggest systems, they don't tell us exactly what text they're trained on. And people have tried to sort of reverse investigate that. Um, so I wanted to kind of go on to the next kind of pedagogical approach that I do find useful for the reasons we've talked about. Um, and that is AI for formative feedback. So by formative feedback, I mean not grading them, not even justifying a grade, but feedback that they're using to inform their work, um, and to improve what they're going to submit. And this could be feedback on writing. It could be feedback also on any open-ended assignment, um, including, video or audio or slides. But I would say as a writing teacher that I think this can be useful, and I would never want it to replace human feedback, because if we're asking them to communicate in some way, then that communication loses meaning if there's never any human audience. Um, but that said, there are feedback needs that are never going to be fully met by peers, teachers, tutors, even in the best system, even in the best funded system, um, where tutors are pretty available and teachers have small classes. There is some benefit to getting feedback in off hours, getting an immediate response, being able to go back and ask for multiple iterations of feedback. We can never give as much as we want as teachers. Um, and so the other benefit, I think, to working with AI feedback is that it does show students what these systems are capable of. And if the student is seeking to communicate, if the assignment is for them to come to some judgment of their own and to say something that they actually mean, then the AI isn't always going to be right, even if it's very sophisticated. It's really about what does the student want to say? What is their intention, their meaning? And so in engaging with feedback, they do get practice looking for where the AI is off, where it doesn't align with their own purpose, or their own intention or voice. So there is some practice there in pushing back against AI if we support that. Um, it does leave the students in charge. So unlike inviting them to auto-generate a first draft or something, using AI for feedback means that we're keeping their voice separate. Their writing or their speech or video or slides is theirs. And the AI has a very specific role, which is to reflect on that and to give them material so that they could make changes. The other thing that can happen with feedback is that they maybe can control what kind of feedback they get. And that gives them some practice with prompting AI. And it also gives them a sense of control and choice and reflection on what it is they need or want. I think I've covered this, that it could be used for audio video assignments. I think the thing that we maybe don't always think of with feedback, I think of first, you know, it would give me a list of feedback according to how this assignment might be graded on a rubric, right? And that is one way that we can get AI feedback, a sort of a comprehensive rubric-based, how does this measure up, right, to particular criteria? And certainly that could be useful, but there are a lot of other kinds of feedback that, with the ins and outs of the writing process and the psychology of how we wrestle with ideas and with our own work, there could be a lot of different ways feedback could support a student in that process. So even just as basic as encouragement, sometimes that's what I need, and I don't want to hear the critique. Feedback on what might not be clear to the reader, what might need some development. And then, allowing students to focus on one aspect of how the piece might be graded, whether it's organization or quality of evidence, or how interesting it is, how readers might respond emotionally, style, tone, what are possible counter arguments. I'm kind of, these are mainly writing focused examples, but meeting genre expectations. So whatever your discipline, what are the expectations for that genre, and how does this piece specifically meet those, or how could it improve? So I would love for if you would like to explore some types of feedback. The there is a free library of types of feedback that I just put in the chat. And yeah, as Liz is pointing out, it may get this feedback wrong. It won't always be right. Either maybe about the specifics of MLA or APA format, or about what the student really wants to say and what they intended in the draft. And so we want to build in that supporting the student's skepticism. So the feedback library I just put in the chat is all developed by educators who've said they want to share these types of feedback, and you can filter it by your discipline or keywords, or by popularity. And if you want to explore that a little bit, if you see something interesting and you want to put a comment in the chat, that'd be great. I might not get to pause as long as I'd like here for discussion, because I want to make sure I do get through the whole presentation, but feel free to keep exploring that. And I would love for you to quickly also explore a quick way to explore feedback is through this research topic feedback bot. So I invite my students to develop a research paper on any topic that they want, and often it's challenging to narrow that down. And so this bot is supposed to sort of support the process of figuring out your topic and exploring topics. And so you can tell it, I have no idea where to start, and it will ask you questions about your interests. Or I want to talk about jellyfish, and it sort of engages with you as a conversation partner, hopefully. And this is a free bot that no login required on a platform called PlayLab that is developed for educators. That's a nonprofit platform. So those are just a couple things to explore. I should probably say just nuts and bolts. I'll talk about my essay feedback. There's a question there. But you can invite students to engage with feedback with free chatbots like ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, Gemini, Perplexity. Another site, Poe.com, has access to a lot of different underlying systems and custom bots. And those are all free, but they might not protect student data as much as we want. And they might not use the most advanced underlying language model, so they might not give the most sophisticated feedback. Right now, ChatGPT free version will give you that most advanced, well, not the most advanced, but the main advanced version 4.0. But there are also these custom chatbots, like Mark Marino's Coach Tutor on Poe.com, or mine that I'm sharing about in this presentation. However, I am mostly using this site, myessayfeedback.ai. I got involved as a volunteer advisor on it through my OER, Open Educational Resources, textbook platform connection to the developer, Eric Keene. And so I do share about that a little bit. Yeah, so interesting question in the chat. With any of these, you can give it specific instructions or assignment information in the form of a file if you want to customize what kind of feedback you're going to get. The nice thing about my essay feedback is that it provides some guardrails and facilitates teacher guidance. So I can see what feedback the students are getting and how they're responding, and I can weigh in and comment on it where I think it might be wrong. It will automatically give students credit in the learning management system for participation in engaging with the feedback. And there are reminders that are built in that say, so what did you think? Did this match your expectations and what you actually intended? Is there anything inaccurate? Again, just encouraging, supporting their confidence to question what it's giving them. And let me finish this and then I'll pause for questions because I think I might be missing something in the chat, but I don't want to lose my thread. So template phrases, this is another set of example phrases just to support them saying, it got this point that I was saying, right? But I think it's not, it's off about this aspect of what I was trying to do, right? So giving them models for that to, again, build confidence. One other way that I try to build skepticism of AI feedback that I'm experimenting with is through contradictory feedback. So actually asking the AI to give me mutually incompatible suggestions. So I tried this with my own, with a paper that I'm working on as a co-author. And I said, what should be my highest priority for revision of this paper? And it gave me 3 incompatible answers. 1, focus on streamlining the length and structure. 2 was strengthen the theoretical framework first. It needs a more rigorous analysis. And 3, the top priority should be adding more concrete examples, right? So I actually found this really helpful because it did give me a sense of what my options were and made me think about what was important to me in the paper. Again, making me feel a sense of agency, that it's not just telling me what to do. I'm weighing what's important to me. And ooh, you can't see, but this arrow is supposed to be pointing to the last option, which I thought, yes, that is where I want to go. That is the most important to me. And you can use that contradictory chatbot also through Playlab for free or invite students to use it. I put that in the chat. So let me just check if there were big questions about the feedback section. I do a whole workshop on feedback, but so there are a lot of ways to invite students to engage with it. And one thing you can do is to encourage students or even require them to speak back to the feedback a certain number of times. So have an ongoing chat conversation with it. And I think it's fun that, I had students this semester who said, it didn't make sense to me. It was using these big words. And I said, well, just tell it, you can even get mad at it, right? Tell it, try again, that didn't make sense. Explain it to me in a more intuitive way, right? So again, we're the authorities here on what works and what doesn't. And yes, I definitely don't want to encourage students to use this. Sorry, don't want to encourage teachers to use this to replace our own feedback to students. And, Eric, the founder of My Essay Feedback, is on board with this. He does not allow that, right? If it seems like that's what a teacher is doing, no, that's not what it's for. So, my sense is we can try to lead the way in saying to students very transparently, I'm still going to give you feedback, but this is another support for you. This is another part of your process. And just to make that really
I will
clear.
call you at your desk in 5.
Um, but just to go on to research assistants, I did want to cover this because I think maybe folks are not as aware as we could be that the AI systems have really changed in this regard from when ChatGPT first came out, and even a year ago. We were often told, they'll make things up, which they do, and they still do. But there's been this attempt to connect chatbots with search. As you've seen in Perplexity, it will bring you some real sources, and it will try to base its chat response on those real sources. And this means that if you're assigning students to do research, there are these new ways that are AI assisted to try to do research. And they are also problematic, and they need a skeptical approach. But some of them are pretty intriguing, pretty powerful. So even just the basic systems like ChatGPT will now search the internet. Um, I I think that possibly the free ChatGPT does search now, but I'm not positive. Certainly Perplexity does, and that's free, right? And Google search will give you AI overviews and link to sources, and that is also free. So even on the free level, we need to now be aware of how these systems will do some combination of generating text based on their training data, but also sometimes bringing in real sources. Um, and there's a whole set of apps in the academic space that are built for academic research with AI, including Elicit, SciSpace, Cite, Consensus, Research Rabbit. There's a whole host, and I'll give you a link to my slide deck that's longer on this subject if you want to dive deep. But as an overview, on one hand, this is great because maybe it will be a little more accurate if it's working with real sources and maybe the sources we're telling it to. But it is risky because it's not reliable. It sort of mimics our academic source citation practices, but it might try to summarize that source and get it wrong. Or sometimes it'll cite a source, but did it really use that source to come up with its output, or was it mostly based on its training data? There's still something of a black box here with all of these systems. So we really have to be skeptical. That said, wouldn't it be amazing if we could get AI summaries of multiple sources, synthesis of sources, comparison of sources? What if we can talk to a research database, right? In natural language, we don't have to do the search terms and the filters and the keywords in the same way that we used to. That's the dream. What if we could just ask, how does the research lean on this yes or no question? How have people cited this publication? Have they cited it as a counter argument or as a support? How do these papers connect to each other? Map out these papers. And there are apps that do all of these things and attempt to do them, but they do them imperfectly. So just one little example from Perplexity. I asked it about a podcast I had listened to, a New York Times podcast from Ezra Klein. And it gave me something that sounded really good with what looked like a footnote, but I found that it wasn't right. It gave me a quote that wasn't from Ezra Klein, it was from his guest. So a relatively minor error, but significant, right? He didn't say that. That was his guest. Maybe he didn't agree. So that's the kind of thing we could share with students. One lesson that I've done, I auto-generated AI hype. So I asked ChatGPT for examples of kind of surprising things about AI. And there's a write-up of the assignment in this collection. And it gave me examples like this. AI can decode ancient scripts. And I asked it to give a source and to talk about the credibility of the source for each of these claims. Um, in this case, when I looked up this paper, there was no such paper and there was no such author. And I shared that with students. And I shared with them the funny thing that happened. So it told me this paper was by Jan Bengio, and it turns out there's no Jan Bengio, but there's a Jan LeCun and a Joshua Bengio. And they are people who've published on the subject and they've worked together. They're considered godfathers of AI. So you can kind of see how, as a word calculator, ChatGPT put their names together probabilistically. It kind of fit with what one might predict. Here's another example of a claim that, and a source that I vetted and I critiqued, and I shared with students my critique of what it had given. And I invited students to do their own critique of some more claims. So I gave them examples of my critiques, and then I invited them to research other claims from ChatGPT. And you can find more about my skeptical approaches to AI research tools, including lots about the specific apps, at this other slide deck. So maybe, Rachel, if you want to interrupt me if there are things I've missed in the chat that are specific to these slides, before I go on. I'm just scanning.
Yeah, I think as far as I can tell, I think there's a lot of crosstalk and conversation in the chat. A lot of questions about the accuracy and capabilities of individual AI tools, but I think that in general, you're rolling along. And we could ask people to move to using that Q&A for questions for Anna specifically. Now might be a good time to do that. So I think it's okay to have conversation continue in the chat, but questions that we want Anna to address, we can jump over to the Q&A.
Great. And for some reason, it's not showing me the Q&A while I'm sharing screen. So I might have to, if you want to let me know what I've missed there that I haven't addressed, that would be amazing.
Sure, I'll take a look through that now and we can circle back.
Okay, great. So I did mention earlier that one way to build this AI literacy is to invite students to chat directly with an AI system. And you can see the benefits might be that feels more engaging, more active. They can speak back to it. We can coach them to build confidence about pushing it and prompting it. And I think it does make sense to share some basic prompting strategies with students if we do this. I think the good news about prompting is that it's not super technical. There was a movement to sort of call it prompt engineering and to come up with these long acronyms of all the things you're supposed to include in a prompt. And I am of the camp that pushes back against that, along with Ethan Mollick, of the Wharton Business School, who's a big spokesperson on AI and education. Really it's about describing what you want as precisely as you can and continuing to try, continuing to push the AI system. And I do have a reading on that you can certainly assign, that's still in Google Doc form. Yeah, there's a great question about if there are systems that can create images. Yes, definitely there are free systems that will make images, including ChatGPT, I believe. Poe.com has image generators. I think Gemini has free image generators. And that is a good way to come up with stuff that's inaccurate, because often the image generators will make more mistakes in terms of accuracy, especially when they're working with text. So yeah, and often they will also reveal bias really powerfully. So as far as like main messages about prompting, you can tell it a specific role, like you are my mentor, you are an expert in XYZ. You can tell it what your context is, what you're working on, upload files, give it examples of what you like, what you don't like. So those are ways to be specific, but you don't have to do all those things every time you prompt. You can do a meta prompt. You can ask it to ask you questions or ask it what would a good prompt look like for this task. Um, you can ask AI to take it step by step. Even just giving it that phrase, take it step by step, has been shown to improve results. Or you can give it the steps, tell it do this first, then do this part of the process. Sometimes that leads to better outcomes. But mainly you've got to tell it when you're not satisfied with what it gave you. So, even I still have this impulse to be like, oh, I guess it's not that good yet when I get a result that I don't like. And I have to remind myself, tell it, you know, give me something less cliche, or I want something more insightful, or, make it more interesting, um, give it more depth, right? So pushing it to do better. Um, and then really anything that we've learned in school can help our prompt. Well, not anything, but like the basic skills we're learning in school and in our subject matter area will help us to prompt in that subject matter area. So those are my main messages about prompting. And the other is to be playful and curious, because really, um, even the experts don't entirely know what will work best with prompting and why. So, they've done some weird experiments with, if you tell it that you're Einstein, that it's Einstein, it'll do this. But if you tell it that you're this other this other physicist, then it actually does better. I mean, they don't fully understand. So there's an aspect of play to prompting and curiosity that really will help us to get more out of it and to enjoy the process. So some examples of assigning students to chat include this one asks students to compare a ChatGPT analysis of Coca-Cola using real world data with an actual analysis. This one had students practice for an interview with a human by engaging in a similar interview with a chatbot first and reflecting on that. And there, it would make sense to question, when you ask it to represent a translingual speaker, a heritage language speaker, does it have any stereotypes about that heritage language speaker? How does it represent them, right? So another option, if you want to invite students to engage in chat sessions and you want to guide that chat session, is to create a custom chat bot. And that sounds really fancy. And I do like to say I made a bot, it sounds like I'm programming, but really what it is just instructions, a prompt that doesn't change. That whenever you chat with that system, it's got these instructions behind the scene. And it can be as simple as you want to make that custom bot. It just means students don't have to copy and paste a prompt that you're giving them. The bot already has those instructions and you just give them the link. And they can give it more information. So if you're interested in doing that, one platform that I recommend, I've mentioned, is PlayLab. PlayLab is has a great training. They often have a wait list. So if you wanted to explore this, I do invite you to use this workspace that I created. You can create an account there and just play around. And you can use this other link to their asynchronous kind of course materials to get some help with that if you want. Again, their training is fantastic, so get into that if you can. But if you just wanted to play with this, it is available. You can also use Poe.com. Pretty straightforward to use to make a custom bot that would be free for students. And Mark Marino's Coach Tutor is a great example of that for a writing tutor bot. You can also make, if you're a paid user of ChatGPT, you can make custom bots on there. I don't find the interface as good as PlayLab, honestly. So I would suggest, don't buy access to ChatGPT just so you can make a custom bot. I don't think it's better than PlayLab. And you can copy and paste custom bot prompts and edit them, right? So I've shared some of the prompts for my bots that and Mark Marino shares his. Ethan Malik has lots of prompt ideas here, very creative ideas. Um, and if you get into PlayLab, you can remix other people's bots. So you can go to this library of bots, but created by educators, and you can say, hey, I like that one, but I want to adapt it for my class. And you can just copy it and edit it. So it's really built for collaboration. If you invite students to do a chat session, you're going to want them to share a transcript of that session, probably. And thanks for that question about PlayLab. No, I believe PlayLab's creating an enterprise account program, but the link that I shared is just for an individual educator account. But I haven't yet hit any paywalls with PlayLab, or with sharing the bots that I've created publicly with anyone. So I'm hopeful that will work for your students. So you might know there's a share button in ChatGPT or Gemini, and that will create a link to a web page that shows a transcript of that chat session. So your student you could say, to fulfill this assignment, share the chat transcript link, right? If you're using Claude, and I do recommend Claude's, even the free version is quite good. That's from the company Anthropic. Many people think that their best version is better than the current ChatGPT. I do use Claude, prefer Claude for my own writing assistance, or feedback. And they don't have a share button, which is annoying, but there is this site aiarchives.org that has a little extension, so you can use that for free to create a transcript of a chat session with Claude.
Um,
PlayLab will also create
oh,
a transcript. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, Anna. We do have some questions popping up in the Q&A, and I want to
Great.
make sure that we are honoring them. I don't know if we want to do like a big Q&A at the end as you finish up, or if you want to pause. I'll leave it up to you.
I'm happy to pause if things are coming up that seem urgent that you want to.
Sure.
Yeah.
So a couple of one recent question is it okay to use and link to the bots that you're sharing, like the grammar explainer bot?
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
A question that just popped up is, have you had any issues using any of these apps with students with disabilities or other accommodations?
That's a great question, and I haven't had any problems come up, but I do always offer an alternative. Um, and I really should have a slide about that, because that's in the blueprint for a Bill of Rights, AI Bill of Rights for Education. The idea that we might have students who are not comfortable using these systems, either for ethical reasons or privacy concerns. Um, and I definitely want to support that and support their making a choice about that. I understand there are some very good reasons to have ethical concerns, and that's a whole other presentation. Um, but that is the bottom line for me, that I would always offer an alternative with the same learning goals. Um, and but that said, I do think these platforms are accessible to my knowledge. I know my essay feedback has been tested for accessibility. Um, but yeah, I appreciate that question. Um,
Sorry. Okay, great. And I'm just going to ask two more. There's some further up that I think you've addressed. You talked about image generating possibilities like, DALL-E is in ChatGPT now and Copilot. You've also addressed the questions about prompting, and you just shared some resources there. One question we have is, do you check papers for AI use, and do students correctly cite the AI source in a writing style like MLA?
Yeah. So I actually don't invite my students to use AI for writing or text that they're submitting for a writing assignment. I actually ask them not to do that. I don't think my students are really ready for that, given my first year writing goals in my own philosophy. But I certainly would ask them to use MLA format to cite any AI assistance. Um, and the academic integrity question is a huge one. I use a combination of approaches um, to reduce the likelihood that students would outsource that writing and miss out on the thinking process that I've designed the assignment for. And, I do a combination of process tracking with kind of the history of how much time is spent in copy paste history with the document. I don't use AI detection at the moment because of concern about false positives. But I think a combination of approaches can help us to reduce any misuse that could get in the way of learning. I'm not using a punitive approach. If I suspect AI misuse, I will have a conversation with the student and usually give them a chance to redo. Um, but yeah, I want to build trust. But I do recognize there's a real temptation and there's a reality that a lot of students are missing out on some learning experiences because they're auto-generating, where we've designed something for a thought process for their own learning, right? Um,
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, especially as we're moving through these ideas with you. You're encouraging these different modes of AI literacy that can work through a range of assignments and are not necessarily just inviting students, as you're saying, to use AI in a traditional essay format. So I think that's really useful. And the last question I'll just share for now, making sure that I'm um, honoring the questions, because I think you've answered several of them, is what would you recommend to use as a generative AI tool, Perplexity versus ChatGPT, to start building AI literacy in class?
I think any of them would be fine. I like using PlayLab because I do trust that nonprofit platform that's started by Yusuf Ahmad, who has some ties to MIT and their open courseware project, I believe. Um, and I trust that they're not going to use the student data for training AI systems. I've looked at their privacy policy. Um, so I do like using the PlayLab bots, but and my essay feedback for some of the same reasons. But I think any of those systems, I don't have a reason to trust one over another. As far as overall quality, I think the Claude paid version is slightly better at this point, but the ChatGPT free version is good enough that I don't think that's significant. And certainly we're not going to ask students to pay $20 a month for Claude. So um yeah. And at the end I'll bring up the have a slide deck on academic integrity questions and AI that I can share just so to put that out there in terms of that big discussion. Um, but I do think that inviting students to use it in particular ways that are very clearly supportive of their thinking, it sends a really good message about the appropriate role of AI, and it really distinguishes the kind of phoning it in AI to skip learning from AI to stimulate learning. Um, and so I think it does support academic integrity to do some of this, to give it a role that's limited and guided. Um, and so just to come back to the sharing chat transcripts, you can do that in PlayLab now. Um, there's a little weird thing that if I'm logged into PlayLab and I try to share a conversation transcript, it doesn't work for some reason at the moment. But if I'm not logged in, it does work. So the students are not going to be logged in and they could share their chat transcripts. The other thing you can do in PlayLab is just to copy the whole conversation. There's a copy button, and put that into a Google Doc. And I actually like doing that because you can have them comment on it. So I have a link here to a sample Google Doc where I've pasted in a PlayLab chat transcript and I've put some comments on it. You can also do that with, if you do social annotation with Hypothesis or Perusal, you can upload a chat transcript there and have students annotate it for homework where they can see each other's comments and speak back to each other and kind of have a conversation in the margins. Again, sort of bringing in this social element. So it's not just AI is isolating, it's we're humans having a discussion about AI and how to get the most out of it and where it's wrong and where it's crazy, etc. And that's also something that the chat session sharing happens within my essay feedback if you're using that app, because the instructor can see the students chat, and then you can also do peer review with that as well, where the peers see it. So one example of that with my contradictory chatbot, I think I put a sample from the screenshot. So it's just a Google Doc, and I just used their copy function to put the chat into the Google Doc, and then here in the margin, I've got my comments, including where I liked its feedback. So I asked it, what is this paper's main argument? So that's a really interesting way to get feedback, is like that reverse, tell me what I said. And then I reflect on, well, is it really reflecting? Is that really what I said? Is that what I meant to say? Did it get it wrong? Do I need to clarify? And so, I can have that discussion in the margin of the Google Doc and share that with the teacher. So the teacher can even weigh in those comments. So that's what I have for you formally in terms of my basic approaches. But I did want to share a little bit of the platforms that I love for getting more creative ideas about this. So I mentioned the AI Pedagogy Project. It's a really well-designed, not overwhelming site from Harvard's Meta Lab that draws on instructors from a lot of different institutions. And it has some introductory materials on AI, as well as these very clearly described, simply described lesson plans. Another one is Text Gen Ed, Teaching with Text Generation Technologies, from the Writing Across the Curriculum Clearinghouse. I've gotten a lot of great ideas from that anthology. These are peer reviewed with a lot of sort of supplementary materials you can use. Ethan and Lilach Malick's paper, Assigning AI, has a lot of sort of surprising approaches to me, things I wouldn't have thought of. Like getting having the student teach the AI a particular concept. Just things that kind of reverse expectations in that paper. Jose Antonio Bowen's book, Teaching with AI, is full of great ideas, and ideas worth considering. And he shares all of the prompts from that book publicly, so you don't have to buy the book to see the prompts, and to see his advice about what tools and systems to use. And then this is a site that we put together that I invite you to contribute to if you like. It's sort of a crowdsourced collection of teaching reflections, what you tried and how it went, involving AI, and also academic integrity. And this is something we put together from the task force that I'm on. So a bit of a focus on writing, but not exclusively. And so that's all I have formally, and I'm sure I missed a lot in the Q&A and the comments. But we can keep talking now, and also I just invite you to connect on social media. I've learned so much, and I constantly learning on social media, on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, still a little bit on X, but trying to get off of there. So I hope you might connect on there, um, and you can also comment on these slides. Um, so that's what I've got formally. So I'm gonna stop sharing for a second so I can see the Q&A. Um, for whatever reason, that was not working for me, but now I can see it. Um,
That's
yeah,
great, Anna. Yeah, and maybe we can just invite folks now. We have until 3:15 here with Anna. So if you do have additional questions that you haven't asked, please enter them into that Q&A space and we can move through them chronologically. Anna, if you are able to look back through
mhm.
that Q&A. Also, I was kind of monitoring the chat. There are a couple that you could speak to. One that I noticed in the chat, you were mentioning progress, tracking student progress as a way of taking a look at their writing history. Are you using Google Docs for that? What is your preferred software? And if you could talk a little bit more about that process.
Sure. So I am experimenting with using Grammarly's authorship function, which is in beta testing, and it is free, um, included with any free Grammarly account. And what that does is it lets the student generate a report on their process for a Google Doc. Um, and that includes the time spent, what was copied and pasted, what was typed. Um, it's not foolproof. So unfortunately, there are now free sites that will simulate typing into a Google Doc for free. I already said that. And so it's not 100%. They could also retype AI text, but I think it reduces the chance that somebody's going to go to all that hassle. Um, and you can see that they were in this document for a certain amount of time. And if you want, you can ask them to share what actual edits they made so you can replay their whole writing history. I'm trying to move away from asking them to share that because I'm concerned people make people self-conscious about their initial, rough draft. But you do have that option. So I do think it reduces misuse to ask them to share the process, but I also invite them to I try to make clear that I understand they might not be comfortable with that for a lot of reasons, and that I offer an alternative, which is to have a quick meeting with me to talk about their process. Again, so this is not completely foolproof. They could try to cheat that system, but it's going to reduce the chance that they will, is my hope. Um, so there are also various other systems and platforms coming up, like Roomy Docs, antecedent writing, for tracking process, and there are free Chrome extensions for Google Docs that will do it, although there are some concerns about the data sharing with those. So that's why I'm using Grammarly for the moment. Um,
Great, thank you. And so we have had three more recent questions pop up in the Q&A. First, we have, how do you encourage students to see AI as a complement and not a substitute to their work?
Um, I mean, I think it's going to be always very tricky and there will be gray areas. So if we're asking them to use AI but then revise it, um, I want to help them build their metacognitive reflection in general to help them with those gray areas and those judgment calls, because we're going to all be making those as we work with AI going forward. Deciding when is it helping me, when is it hurting, when is it its idea, when was that my idea. Um and but I think that by using these very specific, clearly delineated approaches, like feedback that separates their writing from the feedback, um, and critiquing examples, these are cases where it is a little more separate and more cut and dry. I find that helpful with students in my first year writing classes, so that it's not quite so overwhelming to make all those judgment calls. Um, but I know a lot of people are experimenting with inviting students to use AI in the process of writing an essay and drafting and brainstorming. but I feel like that's a lot um, to assess also for me. How much was them? How much was the AI? Um, so that's where I am. I've fallen on the side of let's keep it really clear. Let's separate these things for now. Um, yeah, there was a great question about my definition of using AI for a student's agency. I don't think I have a really rigorous definition of agency, but I just mean, a sense that they're in charge of what they're trying to say, that what it is that they're submitting, that they're doing for class is about their own intention and their own understanding, um, and their own choices. So they really have that sense of ownership over their learning and over whatever it is they're communicating. I mean, that's my hope in a writing class in general, is that, it's an invitation to join a larger conversation and to find their own voice. And so I want them to feel that way about any AI interaction as well.
I think that makes sense. And in the last minute, I'm just going to group together a couple of questions I'm seeing because I think they ask us to talk about the space where our students might be struggling the most. And I think that you, as a community college instructor, likely have experience with some of those groups. So there's people asking about English language learners or students for whom English is not their first language, people talking about our opportunity programs that might be targeting students coming with special challenges to higher ed. Do you have thoughts about AI in that space specifically?
Um, I mean, I think it's an exciting and interesting. I think that students with disabilities often have more experience working with AI systems already through like much of the software that's used for accommodations for things like reading comprehension and dyslexia are already based on AI. And so people working with those students to help them use those for learning are already talking about, when is it too much help and when is it you and when is it assistance that helps you access your learning. And so I think there's actually a lot of expertise in that field that we can draw on as we're using AI more broadly, um, in ways that are adapted to individual learners. Um, and I think there's a huge potential because if students feel comfortable and confident asking for what they need and articulating what they need, um, in relation to a chatbot, maybe that can complement doing that in real life with their teacher, with their counselor, with their tutor. Um, and so teaching sort of this kind of confident, critical, skeptical prompting strategy really goes with the metacognitive skills, the awareness of our own learning strategies, the self advocacy that could be helpful. But I'm not an expert on that topic, so. Um,
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time. And I want to just once more thank everyone who joined us today. As Anna generously said, if we didn't get to your question, she's all over social media and she posts a lot of great stuff just from other folks too. So we hope that this was useful to you in terms of resources and conversation. And Anna, thank you again for being with us.
you're welcome. And I just put my email in the chat if there are questions that I didn't get to. I apologize and feel free to reach out on email. Um, yeah, and yeah, this has been really wonderful, lively discussion in the chat, and it's been really great. So I hope to connect with more of you in other ways going forward. And I hope that you can have fun and don't feel like you have to figure everything out to have something to offer in terms of engaging with AI with students. Like, there aren't really experts in everything about this. We can figure it out together, and hopefully it can be um, interesting and enjoyable, as well as sometimes disturbing, concerning, and all of those other things. So on that note, I hope you get some enjoyment and intellectual fulfillment from grappling with it.
All right, great. And Lynn Ann, I think